Hi, my name is Gautam Balaji, and this is APUSH-Chapter 1, New World Beginnings, where we will be examining the origins of American history. So, this is the beginning of American history, and as boring as it is, we have to study geography. So, the Appalachians were forming about 350 million years ago in the eastern portion of the United States, and the Rocky Mountains on the northwestern point of the United States were forming about 133 to 25 million years ago. So these are two important ranges, two important geographic, locations that we need to be cognizant of and we need to be aware of. So the Canadian Shield Zone, which was a zone guarded by ancient rock, and it was the first part of what became the North American landmass, and it's basically where we live. It's the first portion in the large scale of geography that where we live on the American continent. And finally, we have to study about glaciers, which were treated about 10,000 years ago, leaving the landscape the way it is now, formed from the bases of the Appalachians and the Rockies, and they created the basis for the Columbia and the Snake Rivers in the northwestern part of the United States, between Oregon and Washington State. So where are them people at? Kind of funny, but where are the people? So the people first started coming across the Bering Strait about 35 years ago from Eurasia. So the eastern parts of Russia and Turkey and Anatolia. But after the end of the Ice Age, they couldn't come over. Now we wonder why. I'll give you a second. It's basically because the strait melted after the end of the Ice Age. But enough people did emerge from Eurasia to make about 54 million people in 1492, which spanned North, Central, and South America, and these people made up most of the indigenous tribes in the Americas. So there were the Incans in Peru, the Aztecs in Mexico, and the Mayans in Mexico as well, along with the Olmecs. But because the Mayans and the Olmecs really occurred before the age of exploration, we really aren't going to be studying them, but I just threw them in there just because it's important to be cognizant and it's important general knowledge that we need to know, and they might come up on a test. So back in the old days, so in 5000 BCE, the hunter-gatherers in Mexico, they first stopped becoming, these people who all they did was hunt for meat and pick berries and nuts. They started becoming agricultural farmers with wild grass and the staple of corn, as the Aztecs and the Incas started cultivating corn across the Americas in this time period. In Mesopotamia, and about 2,000 years later, in 3000 BCE, that is when the agricultural revolution happened in the eastern portion of the world. And as you can see, there's kind of a contrast that the Americas were kind of advanced technologically rather than the Mesopotamians and the Sumerians. So in 2000 BC, the pueblos in the southwest portion of the Rio Grande Valley of the United States had irrigation systems to help water the cornfields and the dwelling villages of the terraced buildings. So when the Spanish first came and they saw these advanced architecture in the pueblo regions, they were just astounded that all these indigenous tribes were putting up such fantastic works of architecture. Now, these civilizations were separate. There were no nation states like in Greece, where the Athens and the Spartans, the Thebans, the Cretes. It wasn't anything like that. These were separate civilizations in different parts of the country. Now, two important civilizations that we need to know are the Mississippian settlement at Cahokia near St. Louis and the Ansantes in New Mexico, where they built fantastic buildings and fantastic houses. Those two civilizations really aren't going to be exploring. They're just important to be cognizant of as we move forward in the lesson. So farming, Now, the farming that the Aztecs and the Incans used were called the three-sister farming system, which was a technique growing on the trellis of the corn, stalks, and squash, which covered the planting mallets to retain moisture in the soil. And this farming technique helped provide a rich diet to the Creek, the Choctaw, and the Cherokee peoples, and it was one of the steps in the agricultural revolution which allowed people to cultivate more and more food and support burgeoning populations as more people could survive off this increased number of food supply. So about the Native Americans. Now this part is capitalized because I believe it's important that we recognize these important concepts. So they didn't believe in aggression, they didn't believe in any desire of physical worth. They felt that they did not own the land, in opposed to the Europeans who felt that the land was to themselves to profit on, to grow cash crops, to grow tobacco. And you see this stark contrast as we move forward in the next 500 years, as the Europeans want to profit of the land, while the Native Americans just want to share it and just be partners with the land, as we'll colloquially say. So the Scandinavians, led by Leif Erikson and his father Eric the Red, they first came to Newfoundland, the eastern portion of Canada, in 1000 CE, but these were flimsy settlements. These were real colonies, as we'll see later. Now, the Christian Crusaders actually impacted the discovery of the New World more, as they went to Jerusalem to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims. And as they went to Jerusalem, they passed through areas like the Middle East and India and China, and they saw the riches and the wealth of that area, and they wanted to have a piece of that too. So they wanted to find a quicker route to that area because they were just attracted by all of this wealth. They wanted to go there just so that they could profit, off these riches and off these great wealth there as well. And this is the first sign of the greed of the Europeans, as we'll see forward with slavery and more types of trade. So trade routes. So the luxuries of the East had to be transported from the Spice Islands, which were India, China, Indonesia, back to Europe, and that sort of system was the trade routes that we're going to be discussing here. So the journey was across the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea, with Muslim middlemen enacting heavy tolls on the route. Now, this whole process was very expensive, so caravels were put in place to help support and accelerate the trade, even though it really didn't help the cost of the Europeans. They had to pay a lot of money to the Muslim middlemen that they had to support. Now, an interesting part of this whole trade was that as the Europeans went through, these parts of Asia and Africa, they were astounded by, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, like the Mali Kingdom and the Songhai Kingdom, which had so much gold, so much wealth, so much education, like, their college at Timbuktu. And the Europeans realized that they would have to, advance their own civilization, or at least take some of the other civilizations' wealth and some of their riches to compete. And it kind of gave them a desire, and you could even say greed, to help advance their standard of living in terms of other parts of the world. So more about these trade routes. So the Portuguese were the first group of people, the first European peoples to set up trading positions along the African shore for gold and also slaves. Now, slaves, the concept of slavery in this region wasn't new. The Arabs and the sub-Saharan Africans were trading slaves for many, many years. But the concept of industrializing and commercializing slaves to make profits and to make cash crops were unheard of in the region, as the Portuguese built up, these large slave plantations whose main goal was to make sugar in Satome, Principe, and the Canaries, to help, accelerate the production of sugar. And this was the first, spark to the infamous slave trade in the creation of the modern plantation system. So as you can see here, this was trade routes that were used at the time. So the Europeans would normally have to go through Persia, India, and China all by land, and maybe to Java through the Strait or maybe through the ocean as well. They wanted to find a quicker route through the Arabian Sea and through the Indian Gulf to get to these Spice Islands and to get to these goods as fast as possible. So my boy Christopher Columbus, not really because he was a terrible guy, but Spain, they didn't want to be usurped and be the second best continent on the Iberian, second best country on the Iberian Peninsula, and they wanted to have a piece of the slave trade and a faster route to the Arab world in India as well. So they hired Italian, privateer Christopher Columbus, known as Christopher Colombo at that time, to sail westward and get to these the Spice Islands. However, Columbus messed up. He got lost. He ended up in the Americas by accident, and he saw that they had brown skin. And he thought they ended up in India, so he called these people Indians, even though they were actually people of the West Indies, totally different people than the indigenous people from India, the actual country. Now, this discovery, this accomplishment, this accident, whatever you call it, it's arguably the greatest accomplishment ever, because it started the age of exploration and growth in the United States with regards to these European countries, and it started the basis of the colonies being set up and the future of the United States coming to fruition. So Christopher Columbus's main impact was the Columbian Exchange, which brought old and new world cultures, foods, diseases, and even animals to and from the Americas. The New World brought food and crops, and they also brought iguanas and snakes as well. And the Old World brought animals like cattle, swine, horses. But unfortunately, the main impact that the Old World had on the New World and the indigenous peoples were disease and organisms that called yellow fever, malaria, and even smallpox. And the biggest impact of this whole exchange was the disease and death brought by the old world sicknesses, because these indigenous peoples didn't have the immunity and the vaccines definitely at that time to be immune and to be protected from these old world germs. So as a result, generations of Indians just died from the disease. So back to politics. So the Treaty of Tordesillas was where basically the Spanish and the Portuguese, they went to the Pope and they helped carve up the New World like a stick. And most of the land did go to Spain, in South America, to be honest. But the Portuguese did receive parts of Africa and Asia, and also land that would make up most of Brazil. Now, the encomienda system was the system created by the Spanish to help control and regulate the American Indian labor in the area, because the Spanish worked in quotation marks with the Indians to help colonize the Americas. This was basically slavery. It was brutal, it was torturous, they mutilated and they hurt the Indian residents, and it was even quoted and token to be a moral pestilence invented by Satan. Now, Hernan Cortez, a conquistador, who lives up to his Spanish conquistador name, he went from Cuba to Mexico. He picked up a slave Malinche to help translate, who would later become one of his wives. And he made his final downfall in Veracruz, a port city of Mexico, to help conquer the Aztec Empire after he heard of great wealth and riches. And he even took his men off the ship and he burnt all of his ships and burnt all of his supplies just to make them hungry and just make them, full of, ambitious to help conquer the Aztec Empire. So a peace offering, you gotta be kidding me. Well, this whole thing just gets me every single time. So Cortez tried to make peace with the Aztec chieftain Montezuma, who gave him gifts, which was what Cortez was all about, the gold and the riches. Montezuma saw Cortez as some sort of eastern sea god, Quetzalcoatl, who was, one above everybody else, and he thought that Cortez came as, a sign of fortune for the empire. But we all know why Cortez came in, to conquer and to take all the wealth. But the Aztecs at the time full-heartedly believed that Cortez, was a god. And as you can see, we can predict what's going to happen. So the fall of the Aztec Empire. So because Cortez was treated so hospitably at first, and he just kept on being so hungry and greedy for the riches, the Aztecs just got fed up and they attacked the Spaniards on the roads of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, on Noche Triste. And Cortez, according like any other good Spanish leader, he laid siege to the city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, and it capitulated a year later in 1521. The same year, a smallpox epidemic burned through, the city as well. And this further cements the idea that the native population was decimated by the disease and the massacres by what the Spanish brought, as the old world the old world methods of warfare was just too powerful for what these Indians or what these native indigenous peoples were used to. So let's also not forget about the Incas. So Francisco Pizarro was sent by the Spanish to help crush the Incas in Peru in 1532, and he also added more riches to the Spanish Empire. Now this picture is very symbolic. It's very important to me because it shows Pizarro drawing his stick in the line in front of the Incan leader and just stepping over it, just to signify to the Incan people that Pizarro was going to crush the Incan people just as easily as he stepped over a line in the sand. So where is all this New World money going to? So Spain was full of New World silver from Bolivia, from Mexico, and from Peru. And this new metal increased consumer costs by over 500% in the mid-16th century. It also led to the growth of the economic system called capitalism, where markets rule, consumers get the lowest cost and highest quality product available solely due to competition. And also, because these invaders brought in animals, crops, and even languages and customs that helped create the blend of the old and new world, it helped form a set of future relations between the old and the new world. As the old world would, provide labor, would provide the labor and the resources, and the new world would help put them together and help, have some sort of partnership as the years would go forward and help set the foundations of the structure for mercantilism. So imperialism, not really, but I just like to say it because it still works well in this regard. So the Spanish conquistadors went all over the New World, like Balboa, who discovered the Pacific Ocean, Panama, Magellan, who was the first circumnavigator of the globe and explored the tip of South America, Ponce de Leon, who discovered Florida and looked for the Fountain of Youth, but died instead. Coronado, who looked for golden cities but found Arizona and New Mexico, and he went as deep as Kansas, but he did find the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River. DeSoto, who looked through the Mississippi River and Arkansas River for more land, but he didn't find anything else. And overall, the Spanish Empire was so plentiful in the Americas. There's hundreds of settlements, millions of Indians being enslaved, and beautiful buildings and cathedrals being built all over the Spanish-owned territory. It just shows that the Spanish Empire really had some investment in this New World territory. They didn't come here just to take over the land and just to temporarily, absorb it of all its resources too. Even though this, like the Spanish Empire lost its control relatively quickly in the New World, they did have large plans for it, as they did have, hundreds of settlements, and the encomienda system being, distributed and being implemented on a large scale. So the English did send John Cabot to explore North America in the late 1400s. The French king sent Giovanni de Verrazzano in the eastern seaboard in the early 1500s. The French Jacques Cartier went up hundreds of miles up the St. Lawrence River, and La Salle also sailed for Louis XIV in the 1680s, and he sailed down the Mississippi, the first person to sail down the Mississippi River, and he also helped found the fort in Louisiana for the French. So in response to this new aggression, the Spanish fortified and they sent more troops and more supplies to the fortress at St. Augustine, which would become the largest and oldest continuous settlement in the United States in history. So the continued dominance. So the Spanish treated the peoples brutally and horrifically. They massacred the Pueblos at Acoma after cutting off each surviving Indian's foot. So it shows that we have to establish that the Spanish were horrific people, at least the conquistadores. They raped, they killed, they enslaved the Native Americans to brutal extents. But yet in the historical context, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that the Spanish conquistadors were successful in what they set out to be. They wanted to conquer the land. They wanted to find, all the natural resources to help boost themselves up. And even though their methods were horrific and brutal, they did fundamentally accomplish their goals. So also some more of religion. So the Spanish found no gold in New Mexico and no gold cities. So instead they went to being a missionary and being converted these Indians to Christianity. So Pueblo rebels tried to destroy Catholic churches in Pope's rebellion, which killed hundreds of Spanish settlers and built religious settlers centers and these pieces of architecture all across the southwestern part of the Americas. And Father Cerro, another Spanish missionary, a leader in Spain, went to California and tried to convert about 300,000 Indians to Christianity, and he taught them crafts and scripture. And ironically, these Indians did lose their culture and also their lives with disease, but it did show that the Spanish were not only obsessed with finding gold and controlling the land, but they were also obsessed, with converting these people into Christianity to exert their religious and cultural influence into the New World as well. And finally, the Black Legend, the last part of the chapter. Now, I don't full-heartedly agree with this, but we're gonna go over it. So it was the idea that all the conquerors did was torture, butcher, and kill the Indians. They did do that, but they also brought culture, laws, religion, and language to native societies, and they also set ground for future colonialism and exploration. Now, the crime and the destruction these conquistadors brought did pave the way for more countries to continue to explore the Americas, have settlements, and eventually colonies, but to say that they set the precedent or they set the structure solely themselves really isn't fair, because all these other countries' explorers did come, and they also had an impact as well. But overall, the Spanish did have an impact, on the future of the New World and the future of the societies that would come from the New World, and that is the Black Legend.